Yes. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. My name's Uma Dinsmore-Tuli, and I'm honored and delighted and heartwarmed to be here with our special guest, Tracy Stanley, who's talking to us from the land of enchantment in New Mexico about freedom and about Yoga Nidra. And Tracy, love, could you tell us how you first encountered yoga and Yoga Nidra? What brought you on this path? Because I have to say, I mean, people may know you in many respects, but most recently as the author of an excellent book on Yoga Nidra, Radiant Rest.
Thank you. So, yoga came into my life in a way that was completely unexpected, because I found myself on a balcony in South Africa watching a sunset and falling into a spontaneous state of meditation and not knowing what happened, because I wasn't practicing. I didn't know really anything about yoga. All I knew was that something profound had happened, because I experienced this extreme peace and bliss that seemed like it lasted for minutes upon minutes, when in reality, I'm sure it was just a split second, but it was enough for me to taste the fact that this essence was not something outside. It was coming from within. The things had stilled so slowly. My mind had stilled down, had stopped running. And I was so still and watching and waiting for the sun to rise, that somehow I had this emergence of presence. I did not have those words at the time.
Okay.
And I looked around and around and around and talked to people. People thought so what, we don't know what you're talking about. And then eventually I found someone who handed me 6 or 7 books and said, read these. And those books shifted my awareness of the reality that I thought I was in. Books by Khalil Gibran, by Dan Millman, by Richard Bach, things like the Celestine Prophecies. He also managed to get Harsh Johari's meditation book in there. And so that was my first real introduction to what I would say would be more yogic philosophy and thought, and some of the practices that I led myself through in that Harsh Johari book. But the formal introduction to yoga came when I got back to the States. Yeah. And then I walked into a yoga studio and they pointed me left to a Kundalini class. And I basically started Kundalini practice for a few years before I discovered Hatha Yoga, and then discovered the Yoga Sutras translation and realized that I didn't think I was actually practicing yoga.
Yeah.
And, and I started looking for a teacher who I thought could lead me to the promise of what was in the Yoga Sutras, specifically Sutra 136, which was the sutra that really pulled me. And it pulled me, I didn't know it at the time, and I'm actually just now kind of putting this together, but I didn't know it at the time, but I think it was the remembrance of that moment on the balcony that I knew that sutra, Vishoka Vajra Tishmati. I knew that was true. It wasn't an intellectual thing. It was something I felt in my body. And I found a teacher in the tantric lineage, and I was just going to a satsang, and he asked us to lay down. And I thought, well, why are we laying down? We haven't done any asana, right? And he guided us through this deep relaxation practice. He never named it as a deep relaxation practice. He never named it as Yoga Nidra. But as I continued to study and go to classes with him, he would always end the class with this guided deep relaxation, until one day I was in a bookstore and I found one of the earliest books that I had ever seen on Yoga Nidra. And I just, for whatever reason, picked it up and realized that, oh, these directions sound really familiar. This is actually a script that's being read. And this is this practice called Yoga Nidra. So that was my introduction.
Oh, So what I hear when you describe all those experiences of the balcony and the communion, the connection and the remembrance, I hear you describing what's freedom, like the connection within that doesn't belong to anyone else. It's like arising from within. And I'm very moved that you speak about like remembrance and rediscovery. And I wonder maybe if you could speak a little bit about your encounter with how you can share that in your yoga teaching, because you've been on quite a journey with the way that you present Yoga Nidra and the way that you're sharing the work that you do seems to be encouraging that remembrance of freedom within. And I'm just wondering how you got there, because like some of the ways that you describe, some of the classes that people step into, they might not feel quite so free as that. It's that there's a little, maybe a dissonance between that. I don't know. I'd love to hear how you came to this space of sharing the kind of yoga that's so empowering of that connection to freedom.
First of all, I appreciate that reflection. It means a lot. And what I would say is I have to tie it all back to that Sutra 136, because it was the thing that led me to the desire to have a deeper understanding of yoga.
And what's your how would you translate that sutra? How would you get the essence of that across in like everyday language?
Well, the way that I understand it is that there is this place within us that is effulgent and radiant and powerful and truthful and full of wisdom that is eternal, that was there before we had a name and will be there when we no longer have a body. And it is our birthright to know this place. It is our birthright to taste this place. And once you taste this, just for a moment, no one can ever take that away from you.
Yeah.
And so through practice, I had a taste of that for a millisecond. And through divine grace on the balcony, I had a taste of that. Yeah. And I realized for myself how much that changed me, how much it empowered me. And so my desire to teach has always been to empower and to provide space and to protect space so that people can maybe have, because I'm not making anything happen, it's literally grace, is just provide the space for the opportunity for that to happen and for that knowing to arise. And so even when I was teaching mostly, dynamic asana, and then realizing that it's in the laying down and in the guiding of this deep relaxation practice that is preparing us to hopefully receive some of that bliss.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Because what I'm hoping we can convey here, and I feel that this, at the heart of your work as a teacher and as a writer of the work that you've shared, is this a sense that each individual coming into the yoga space is looking to reconnect to what was already there. And I'm wondering if you would speak, and I see that there are so many ways to help this happen, but there are also quite a lot of ways that seem to take people off this track and get us tied up in knots or locked up in cages that are not very helpful. And I wondered if you'd had any encounters with that aspect of the yoga business that maybe is something we could just call out for a bit so people can be aware that maybe, when we speak about trying to eradicate abuse of people in yoga, part of that is almost the sense that we're not certain structures can make it really difficult to access what's people's, as you say, you call it a birthright. So what's happening? What have you seen anything that's going wrong there? Like, how come this isn't happening in all the yoga classes? How come people are getting hurt? And especially women ending up in places where they're exploited or abused? how come that happens in the name of yoga? What's your take
Mhm.
on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I'm forever grateful for the fact that I read that translation very early in my yoga studies,
Yeah.
um, because I feel like the way in which I've seen classes offered and teachers offered and gurus who come a lot of times is that the awakening is somehow coming from another person, right? That the technique is being transmitted, and it's coming, the whatever it is that has happened to you is coming from another person. If you have a realization or if you have a blissful experience, it's coming from outside. And I think that if the teacher does not uh, let you know from the get-go that they are not the one, right?
Yeah.
Not mine, not mine. This is like, yes, we may have studied, or the person may have studied, and they may have had their own deep experiences which help to translate and transmit an experience of something, but it's a revealing.
Yeah.
It's not a gifting of an experience, in my experience. And the teachings that I have received over the years have always been about tantra, the practice of tantra, leading you back to your inner teacher,
Mhm.
leading you back to your inner guru. And then at the place when you have a relationship with that inner guru, you kind of release the relationship with the outer teacher, and you have that relationship with the outer teacher as a way of reverence, as a way of honoring, as a way of saying thank you for guiding me on this path that I may have gone a different way or may not have found, however I found it. But I think that when we start to create things that replicate the outer world, like
Okay.
systems of hierarchy
Yeah.
within, uh, schools, and where people then take on, when I was a film producer, um, way back when, I made a movie called The Experiment, and it was based on the Stanford prison experiment, where they basically took volunteers, and they took those volunteers and they separated them in a mock jail, and they separated them into prisoners and into guards. And they basically took the most kind of awkward, not really together, shy, introverted, and they made them the guards. And they took the people who had more charisma and they made them into the prisoners. And essentially the object of the experiment was to see what happens when people have absolute power and how they begin to treat people. And so I think that, we ascribe these qualities of enlightenment and spiritual attainment to our teachers without this understanding, at least for me, that enlightenment is not a static, it's not a static condition, right? It's like we may have some enlightenment, we may have some, but it's, yes, there are saints and there are people who have had that static position, but when we're in the world,
Yeah.
it's very difficult because we're living a worldly life. We have families, we have to pay bills. We're not in a cave with someone bringing us food and chai 3 times a day. So I think that when we get into these systems, or into these organizations that start to replicate the way organizations are run in corporate world and in, government, and we start to lose the thread of why we're teaching and even why we're studying, then I think things can go really wrong. And I think that the fear, and what I have seen is that the fear of speaking out is because you have created this family right? Your Sangha has become your chosen family. And then there's fear around speaking out because you don't want to lose your family.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a very painful aspect of endeavoring even to not to see, you know, inequity and oppression and abuses within these structures. People will see them but feel unable to speak out because of exactly what you've described. It's an extremely vulnerable position to be in, you know, when people are, you know, dependent or enmeshed or connected to people within that structure. And so it can be quite difficult for people to extricate themselves. I've seen that quite a lot. It's a very painful process.
Yeah. And I also think that the one other thing is that if you haven't been cultivating this relationship with the inner teacher, you may start to question your own wisdom and your own eyes of what you're seeing and what you're feeling. And then you kind of sit alone because you don't want to bring this out into the family. You kind of sit alone with what you feel or sense, or, you know, and so it just becomes something that festers
Yeah.
and can become very toxic.
I mean, my question is, you know, imagine there is perhaps a person listening to what we're discussing who might find themselves in that position right now of questioning and starting to question their own practice and all the things that they've learned. What would you say? What would you maybe invite as practice, something that would help someone get through that? You know, because what you're talking about is a trust with the inner teacher that can be very much eroded by some of the structures that are so exploitative and abusive. What can help us get through those moments of questioning and doubt?
You know, I think that writing a letter of concern to someone who is, let's say, in the hierarchy, because most of these things, establishments have a hierarchy, and be aware of the response that you get. Because to me, if the response is, oh no, that's not happening, oh no, you know, then you have something to think about. If the response is more like, oh, I didn't see this and I'd like to explore this and, you know, want to investigate this because we don't want people to feel this way, then it might be something different.
Yeah.
But I think that those are clues to kind of look towards, for sure.
Yeah. So you're asking, it's like, if what we observe and then we report and voice it, if that's met with a welcome and a willingness to explore what's happening, then maybe there's a way through this. But sometimes you get a response that it's a total flat denial that anything is happening. Or in fact, sometimes what I've seen a lot is people will call this out, and then the victims of the abuse end up being accused of it themselves. That the organization will flip around and say, well, actually, no, these are, it happened with the Shivananda yoga stuff and the Satyananda thing. They called out all the people who were actually the victims of the abuses.
I mean, I can't even imagine. I would consider myself fortunate enough to never have personally experienced this. So any things that I know are very second and third hand.
Yeah.
But I have heard of exactly what you're talking about. It's like all of a sudden there's like a gaslighting going on, and that's a, you know, typical trait of someone who is an abuser.
Yeah. So there was, so these toxic behaviors within the structures that, as you say, that replicate, you know, all the systems that are holding, you know, oppressive systems of power imbalance, basically, where some people are holding. I see that one of the things we're discussing here that might be really helpful to explore is how it is, I think, that you know, maybe, I mean, because the campaign's so focused on women, maybe, do you think women in particular are more at risk or more vulnerable to this kind of questioning? Because you said so much of it's like,
Mm.
trust your inner teacher, it's already there, the teachings help you rediscover that. And I'm wondering if there's something in the structures of the kind of, you know, ways that our culture operates around women and girls as we're brought up. Does that make it more likely that we're going to question our own kind of spiritual authority or our own experiences?
Mm. Well, I mean, I think that, and I don't know the answer, so I'm just guessing, but I think that we, first of all, there's more women practicing yoga than there are men, right? So there's like 70-30, I
Yeah.
think, are the numbers. And the other thing is, I think that just in general, we are taught from a very early age to distrust our intuition, to not daydream, to not be creative, because creative people are not really going to be, like the artists are not really going to be successful, right? And so there's, you know, oh no, you can't have an imaginary friend, it's not real. All of the things that we tell kids already, male, female, or non-binary, are literally being, so we're being told, no, you don't know.
Yeah.
I know better, maybe as the parent, right? I know better. Then you go to school and it's like the teacher knows better. And so it is, I think it's something that's ingrained in the culture,
Yeah.
because from a very early age, we're being told that you need to outsource your own knowing and that you're not powerful, right? And that you're disconnected from nature because you're, unless you're going to Montessori or something, you're not in nature learning. You're
Yeah.
in a building learning. So we're just being disconnected from all of the ways in which we can know our truth.
Yeah. Yeah. So the brilliant thing about yoga and Yoga Nidra is how it helps us actually reconnect to that intuitive wisdom. And I thought it might be really helpful to kind of circle back into the practices that actually, to really, when you think about it, do you think yoga could be like a revolutionary power, a power to cause uprising of folk who are really reconnected to their intuition? How about that? Do you think that's a
What?
possibility?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that any practice that connects you to stillness and connects you to nature, and to your own inner nature
Yeah.
and your own inner universe is a revolution. It is, because it is a waking up. You know, that's why I love Yoga Nidra, because Yoga Nidra is the practice of waking up to your life. You know, yes, you get to be rested, but at the same time, as that wakefulness and that consciousness is weaving through all the states of consciousness, when you come back into your waking life, that level of awareness can stay awake. And that's where you get to see what's really happening. And that's powerful.
Yeah, it's super powerful. It's super powerful. So I do have a vision that at some point we could all practice Yoga Nidra all over the world over like 24-hour period, everybody in their own mother tongue connecting with Yoga Nidra, and that might lead to an enormous awakening and uprising. So I'm wondering, do you have a vision, like a vision for the future of yoga practice? Imagine like if you could just blue sky it or night sky it, and it was absolutely fully liberated practice. What would that look like in your world, Tracy Stanley? What would happen with yoga practice? How would it be?
Well, you know, it's funny because it's not too dissimilar to what you just shared, is that, you know, I often wonder what would happen if we could get the world, which we almost did in a way, the world to lie down and commit to a devoted practice of Yoga Nidra for 40 days, and with journaling. what would be revealed? What truths would be revealed? What untruths would be realized? Like, oh, I've had this belief system and this is actually a lie. And so, you know, the mission and the dream is just to keep sharing these practices really of deep relaxation and rest along with free writing. And I don't really feel like, you know, I love Yoga Nidra and I love the systematic approaches to Yoga Nidra, but if we can just rest in stillness and let the body dissolve, there's so much wisdom there.
Absolutely.
And that's it, you know. And I think the world could change because when you know something, you know.
Oh, and just one last little bit of weaving here, because I feel that we're weaving the. So do you see that this, like a technology for liberation and freedom, how does it intersect with other like movements for equality and freedom, with anti-racist movements, with movements for inclusivity? Do you see there's an intersection between yoga practice and liberation in a more general sense?
Well, absolutely. I feel like just in my own life and some of the teachers that I mentor and some of the students that work with me and friends that I have that are in the work of anti-racism deeply in, they are relying on these practices as a refuge to remember who they really are and to rest from all of the violence that they have to intake on a daily basis, right? Not just in life, but in the workshops and in the trainings that they're doing. We need to reconnect with our joy, first of all, because that Sutra 136 is also talking about that inner joy and that inner light. And I feel like it's a reset. Every time we get to return back to that space, it's a reset. And so, you know, we may be talking about Yoga Nidra right in this moment, but there are, you know, teachers like Michelle Cassandra Johnson who are talking about this and yoga. And, you know, she has a book coming out soon that specifically talks about grief, which is a large part of the anti-racism work. There's Trissa Hershey from the NAP Ministry who is talking about this through a slightly different lens, but just as powerful, if not more powerful. And I can't wait until she starts going back out and doing the art installations, because we need to be able to see this in action to be inspired. And there's many, many more teachers. Yoli is another, I mean, I know everybody here knows Yoli, but Yoli is incredible. And so there's so many teachers that these teachers like Yoli and Michelle Cassandra Johnson and Trisha, they're like our elders. And I'm seeing waves and waves of teachers coming through my trainings and other people's trainings. This world is changing.
Yeah.
Get ready.
Get ready. Oh, thank you so much. I'm going to flag up that some of the teachers you've mentioned, plus also the work of like Gail Parker as well. You did
Dr. Gail. Oh yeah, she's incredible.
on your podcast. I think a really good way for people, if you're not familiar with this work, to check in with Tracee's Radiant Rest podcast, because you interviewed some really inspirational teachers on precisely these topics, on the necessity for yoga as a practice of refuge and restoration and nourishment to actually enable this work to go forward, you know, so that it can happen, that that the change arises from well-rested people.
That's right. You know, I once was in a talk a couple of years ago, and the writer Elizabeth Gilbert, she said, and I was sitting with 3 of my friends who are meditation teachers, and she said, a well-rested woman is a powerful woman. And we all looked at each other like, yeah, we know that. And it's true. You know, the world does not want you to be rested, because when you're rested, you're clear and you're powerful.
Yeah. This
So
is
yeah.
and I give thanks that we're in a place where our connection has come through Yoga Nidra. Um, and I'm just honored and delighted to see how this work of yours has spread and also deepened. And that I'm hoping that you might be able to explain to people the best place that they could go to find a connection to your work. I've mentioned the podcast, which I highly recommend, but would you like to guide people to find your writings and teachings online?
Yeah. So thank you for asking that. I appreciate it. Radiantrest.com has all the information about my book and book club. You can find that there. I have a deep relaxation 5-day experience on Commune, which I believe is free for the first like either 3 or 7 days if you log into it. And my book, which just came out in March, comes with 6 audio download or streaming practices. So if you get the book, you can just go to page, I think it's 102, and you can get the link to your own streaming. And that's probably the best way to find me and connect.
This is beautiful. And do you have a final message for the people watching this about the revolutionary potential of yoga to usher in a time of liberation and
Yeah, I think that when this revolution requires us to be devoted to our practice. And so I always like to try to reframe practice away from how it's been commodified as this 90-minute practice. Really start to think about how you can devote your life as a ritual to practice, where you can just weave in these little 3-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute throughout the day and make your life a practice and let the practice be the teacher, because that's the thing that's going to let us rise.
Thank you, Tracy. That's really beautiful. I'm deeply grateful for your time and presence here. And I hope that people connect with your work, and that, that there may be many more opportunities for people to dive deep into what it is that you're sharing. Thank you, darling. I'm going to stop our recording right now and make sure that all the links will be in the bottom underneath the video for people to see. So Tracy Stanley, thank you so much, love.
Thank you, Uma. Thank you so much.
Stopping the recording right now.